Welcome back to Outside the System. Today's episode is with Joe Martin, an independent musician from the UK who is using value for value as an alternative to the traditional music business model. Value for value is a system where the audience directly supports a creator using the Lightning Network. This was originally used for podcasters through Podcasting 2.0 with platforms like Fountain, and has now expanded to music through platforms like Wavelake. During the episode, Joe compares using value for value to being a street performer, which I thought was funny because this podcast is also supported by Value for Value on apps like Fountain. Let's get into the episode. Joe, thanks for joining me on Outside the System today.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Neil. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think probably the best place to start is maybe just quick introduction on what you're doing, because I probably didn't do it full justice in the intro, and a little bit about your background. And yeah, I can't wait to dive into it. You're actually the second artist I'm having on the podcast. The first one was Lyra, who gave a lot of really interesting look into kind of like Web3 in music, and she was doing something around. She's also an independent artist, so was kind of funding, almost like doing a club of her super fans through kind of like the NFT route. You're doing
Okay.
something which I think is, to me, I think I'm closer to the Bitcoin side than kind of like the Ethereum ecosystem. So what you're doing is just super interesting to me. So yeah, let's dive in.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'm a singer songwriter, first and foremost, but I've been doing music all my life. Started singing and playing piano at like the age of 5 and 6 years old. I did a lot of classical stuff. Well, that's how I started. And then, sort of early teens, picked up a guitar for the first time and, started listening to a lot of singer songwriters that, well, my parents were listening, parents liked, was influenced by their tastes and got into sort of Bob Dylan and James Taylor and, all that kind of stuff, Simon and Garfunkel, like the sort of 60s and 70s singer songwriter stuff, as well as like the Beatles and the Beach Boys and, all that great music. Um, but I didn't start writing songs until sort of age 18, 19, kind of just because probably didn't have enough life experience. And the first batch of songs weren't great either. So none of them are still around today, but you got to start somewhere. So I've been writing for about a decade now. And you never crack it. You never figure out a formula. You're always learning. But no, I've just released my very first studio album, which I've just recently toured around the UK on a 13-date tour. Um, so that's where I am at the moment. And then, sort of the last 6 months, I've been releasing my music on a value for value model, um, sort of challenging the conventions of the way things are done in the industry, especially as an independent artist, because I feel like the way things are currently structured and the way things are currently done isn't really sustainable in the long term. So just trying to look into different ways of releasing music, and value for value is sort of, to me, it seems like one of the best ways that I've come across
Yeah,
to sort of build a sustainable thing going forward. So
yeah. And what's the name of the album that just came out?
it's called Empty Passenger Seat.
Nice. Yeah, and I was listening to it when we were prepping for the episode, and kind of like you almost have for a UK artist, you have a very like almost American country music vibe.
Yeah, so like that's what I've been steeped in as well. Since like the age 18, 19, when I said I started writing songs, I was getting really into country music at that time. Before that, I'd been listening to a lot of just like British folk music and sort of just, I don't know, like American folk as well, I guess. But I watched this show Nashville that came on TV over here. It's obviously an American show, but that was broadcast in like 20. It came out in 2013, I think. And it's funny, a lot of the UK country singer-songwriters cite that show as being a big influence for them. I think a lot of people, like on this side of the pond, like got into more modern country music through that show. It seemed to be a bit of a gateway thing, you know. So I really got into that, and I loved the music that was on that show. It was produced by a guy called T-Bone Burnett, um, and he did like "Oh Brother Where Art Thou" and stuff like that. And I was hearing these songs on the show, and one of the songs on there that just blew my mind was by a guy called John Paul White, who was part of a duo called the Civil Wars, and I was really into them at the time, but I didn't know he'd written the song and all this stuff. So I was hearing this great music through the show, and it made me want to go out to Nashville ever since I started watching that on TV. So, fast forward sort of to 2016, I went out there for the first time, and then um, after that first visit, I'd spoken to I'd been staying with a friend of a friend, sort of like couch surfing with them, and I'd given them a demo tape, and sort of jokingly sort of said before I left, "Oh, can you hand this into the Bluebird?" Because they said they sort of played there quite a while ago, and they knew some of the people in there. And then I come back to England, and a few months later, I get an email from the Bluebird Cafe, and just if you don't know, I don't know if you've seen the show or anything like that, or if you're into country, but the Bluebird Cafe was on the show every week. Like the artists that were on it were like always playing at the Bluebird, and that's how I'd seen this place through the TV show. So I got an email from the Bluebird to say, "We've got your demo tape. Do you want to come and play next time you're in Nashville?" So I booked flights straight back out there again. Went again in 2017 and played at the Bluebird for the first time, which was awesome because I've been watching it, on TV for like years, and
What a moment.
people like Taylor Swift were discovered there, Garth Brooks, like all these sort of legendary country artists were kind of discovered there. So it's a special place in the country music world. So to get to play there was a big moment.
That's like a
But I've
yeah, true dream can come true there.
Yeah, I had to sort of pinch myself,
Yeah.
when I was on stage there. But no, and ever since I've just been doing it, and I just love the genre. I love the storytelling aspect of it as well. I think
Like
it's
the
a good
writing,
challenge.
like writing an actual song, not just performing it or not just singing it, but actually the process of telling that story.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of like I like the sort of cinematic thing of kind of trying to like condense what would be like a 3 hour film or something into a 3 minute song, and you've got to be really really careful with like what words you include and what words you don't include to make every word count and make it really streamlined, powerful like song. That I like that challenge, but
Yeah, and then still
that's
make
kind of
it
what.
sound good too. There's like, yeah, there's so many. Yeah, I feel like writing a song is a next level, like from even writing a book or writing a movie or something. Because there can't be any filler. It's like there has to be every
Yeah,
word has to matter, I guess, to tell that kind of a story.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I've never written a book, so I
Yeah,
wouldn't know. I guess it's a completely different discipline. They've all got the
absolutely.
challenges,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's it is tough, and trying to play to a new crowd that's never heard of you, or never heard any of your songs, to try and win them over, and get their attention within a few minutes. It's quite tough, but it's good. It's good fun.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And then I guess what is so kind of tying it into the business model side, what is the way that like a standard artist today, let's say like not mainstream is not the right word, but kind of taking the standard path, how do they sustain themselves? I'm guessing it's a mix of like touring, streaming, maybe there's some other merch, maybe there's some other revenue streams, but yeah, how does like an artist today sustain themselves in kind of the standard world? And then what is kind of the difference in terms of what you're trying to do? You were saying in the last 6 months, the work you've been doing on the value for value side.
Yeah, so I'd say it's kind of as an artist, as a musician in general, you've got to be quite versatile. You've got to just make yourself as busy as possible and do a lot of different kind of things. So like I feel when I speak to older musicians from like because I gig with a lot of like older guys as well sometimes that were around gigging in the 70s and 80s and stuff, and they sort of told me that back then there were a lot of like clubs that had music on, like working men's clubs, and like everywhere there were venues, and they were always packed, like every night of the week. I guess it's just a different time now, but they said you know you were working 6 nights a week, and you're on a good wage, and getting paid well. So it's kind of different to how it used to be now. But no, it's you kind of have to have a different, be spinning a lot of different plates really. So you got to do like a lot of cover gigs that you might not necessarily want to do, that kind of helps the original stuff. And you just got to be constantly gigging and touring, doing supports for bigger acts if you can learn that kind of stuff. But there's kind of two paths you can take. Like long term, you can try and get signed to like a label, I guess. And there's not really that many independent labels left. I don't think a lot of them they sort of just get consolidated all the way up to like the big three. So like Universal, um, Time Warner, and Sony.
And what is
And
a
then
this might be an overly basic question, but what does a label bring to the table? Is it distribution essentially for an artist? Like gets the word
yeah,
out there essentially?
yeah. So it depends. Like sometimes a label wants to find an artist that has their brand like nailed and already has quite a loyal like fan base, and is making great music, and then they can just take that and then put some more money behind it, put some PR behind it, maybe repackage it a little bit, and just expand on that core fan base that that artist has already cultivated through like years of work and
Pour
gigging and
like
stuff like that.
gasoline on the fire, basically. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
just give them a bigger budget and a bigger platform to kind of do what they're already doing, but on a bigger scale.
right.
And then you sort of have the other side of it where they will take someone from scratch that kind of hasn't done much but shows a lot of promise, and then they want to do artist development with them. They want to like brand them in a specific way, and that's kind of more of like not manufactured, but yeah, like that's more of the label having more hands on with that artist rather than just kind of taking what's already there and just like boosting it, I guess.
There's like development, I guess, in that case. They're helping them develop. In other cases, the artist is already pretty far
Yeah,
along in doing something that's working. It's just how do we grow it
yeah.
essentially?
So they'll do that, and they'll put them with maybe writers that have had hits that are also part of their label or part of their contacts or network, and they'll put them in rights with those people and have them support. Like a big thing is when a label signs a new artist, they will probably put them on tour with one of their other bigger artists that are within the same genre, because it makes sense, right? Like if they have an artist that's playing 2,000 seat theaters or whatever, they're going to have their newly signed artist open up for them to get them exposed to the same crowd, and it's like a 2-for-1 sort of thing. Um, so like that, like a lot of musicians and artists go like want to go down that path, and then the other path is just like the completely independent route, which is a lot harder. You because you've got to kind of do all the different aspects of what a label would do anyway. But the sort of the flip side of that is you get full creative control and get to keep everything you make. Um, so
The trade
it's
off.
it's a trade off, yeah. And kind of the way things have been for quite a while now is that it's like, because there's so little money in doing it's so hard doing the original, the independent thing. Like a lot of artists just kind of want that deal from a label, or because, but I mean, when it depends what the deal is, but a lot of the time the label will just sort of give you an advance, like it's a loan basically, to make an album. They'll give you a budget, and that might span the actual production of the album, PR, etc. And then you're paying that loan off with your
With the
throughout your
earnings.
with the earnings, yeah, for
Yeah.
however many years plus interest. I don't know. But that's essentially what it is. So a lot of the time, I think people have a lot of misconceptions about that. I think, unless you literally do just go huge and global and are making an absolute killing. Um, you hear a lot of horror stories of people that sign to deals, and they'll sign like 4 or 5 album deals, and they can't get out of them legally. And they've got to make you're locked in for however many years, and you've got to give them 4 albums or 5, whatever it is. Um, so I don't know, but I guess
But
we're at the
you've gone the
start of it.
independent route, so it
Yeah,
right.
I
Like,
mean,
are you independent at the
yeah,
moment, or okay?
yeah, fully independent. So I kind of, I guess when I was younger, I did want to go down the label route, um, and now as time's going on, I'm thinking, and I think we're at the start of a big shift with the value for value stuff, which we'll probably get in, yeah, which we're going to get into. We're at the start of a shift of like a new way to monetize content online, which I think, which I think is going to be in favor of the independent artist, like in a big way. It's going to really put the power back in the artist's hands, and it's going to give us a lot more options. Um, and it's going
Yeah,
to bring back a middle ground that's been taken away. I feel because like the the only way to make money now as an artist is gigging, essentially like live shows, and then on top of that you might be selling a bit of merchandise. And merchandise for like the independent artist is a lifesaver, because if you do
mm,
well selling merch at a gig, you can almost like double your fee of what you're on. Like
wow,
this tour I've just done recently. I took a 3-piece band along with me, as well as some supports, and I paid them all their fee, and put them up in the B&Bs and paid for fuel and everything. It's really expensive, and like we did really well on tickets considering it was the first headline tour. But if I hadn't have done as well as I did on merchandise, it would not have been.
you might have
I
been in the
luckily.
hole. Yeah,
Oh, definitely, yeah, I'd have been in the red big time. I mean, like I was lucky enough to break even, but and as well, it helped it being like an album launch. So
right,
like, I had all the albums there ready to sell, and then saying to the
right. So
crowds, I'm saying like, do you want to go home with a copy of the album, because that's what the whole tour is about. It's an album tour.
yeah.
I'm trying to sell these things. So people bought a T-shirt, bought an album. So that really helped a lot. Um, but I've gone off track a bit there.
No, no, you haven't. I mean, I think it's the business model part that we're talking about. And I think, the other part of it, so you said a lot of it comes from touring. What about from like, how does it work on the streaming side?
Right. So this is the thing. Like ever since
Especially
the
since
ad,
you're independent, right? Like I understand, and I think, most people probably understand if somebody's signed to a label and they make streaming revenue, I'm guessing the vast majority of it goes to the label. Um, but,
yeah.
and it probably goes towards that loan that you were talking about. But what about as an independent? Does streaming work any better for you, or is it still an insanely low amount of money that you're getting from streaming?
Yeah, I think unless you're racking up like millions or tens of millions of streams, it's not moving the needle at all. Um, it's kind of like, very sadly, it's sort of seen as a lost leader in a way, which is kind of weird. Like your main product, the music
Right,
itself, is like a lost leader to get people to come to your live show.
right.
But if you've got
And buy
if you've got a
merch.
and buy merch, but if you've got a global listenership, like they can't come to your gigs if you unless you're gigging internationally. Like
Right, but
you know
that's
what I mean?
hard for independent artists to get to that point. I mean, not saying that you can't, but it's not an easy thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, the way I see it is and the way a lot of other artists see it is that they're on Spotify because they have to be, because that's where people go to listen to music first, or YouTube or whatever. So it's like if you're not on those platforms, you kind of like doing yourself, a disservice, because you need to be on there, because they're the dominant sort of networks. They're the dominant platforms for people to go listen and consume music.
That's like the
Um,
distributions. Yeah.
yeah, but no, it doesn't. Like I said, unless you're racking up tens of millions of streams, you're not moving the needle with it at all, really. So I feel like ever since the advent of the internet in general, and then like Napster, LimeWire, and now Spotify, um, the artist had like you know, revenue from recorded music. Um, you know, if it's being, you still get a little bit of money from radio plays and stuff like that, but from just selling music, just selling CDs and stuff like that, and especially for the big labels that, like back in the '90s, they were selling CDs for like £20 back then.
Right.
You know, and that was a lot more than it is now. So, you know, for the
Yeah,
labels
think
as
about how many
well.
streams you would need to get to that from one person. I mean, it's
Oh, I've worked it out. Yeah, it's crazy. Like I worked it out at one point. It was like 3 good nights of me, like 3 good nights for me selling merchandise at a gig is the equivalent of like Wembley Stadium streaming a song for me. Like it's something ridiculous. Like you need to make like 300 quid, you need like 80,000 streams or something. You know, something
wow.
crazy.
So, and that's as an
So,
independent. So imagine if someone is signed to a label, like, and the label's even taking more of a good chunk of that money. It's like streaming is literally nothing then for you
no, no, and
if
then
you're signed. Yeah.
yeah, and ever since like the streaming thing started to take off, labels then started going back to their artists and making them sign 360 deals, which essentially is like not just, you know, the recorded stuff they take a cut of. It's the live, it's the merch, it's
Mm,
anything to do with like branding or any sort of other affiliations you have with anything else. It's like all encompassing because they just they needed to make up that lost revenue
yeah.
from somewhere else.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah,
so
Joe,
it's
I have a book, a nonfiction book, and I have a
okay,
publisher. So I'm like very familiar with the publisher sounds very similar to the label actually. But
right,
luckily I only like when I signed my deal, I guess it was only to the rights to the book. So I've done a bunch of offshoot content that's like courses or like custom coaching or like different type of stuff, which has made way more money than the actual book itself, but the
okay,
publisher doesn't get any of that, right? Because it's not, they only have the rights to the book. Like they do get most of the money off the book. Like somebody goes to Amazon, it's like a $12 book, and I think I get like $1.50 or something out of the $12. Like it's really small. I always tell people when they're like, "Oh, I'll buy a book to support you." I'm like, only if you want. I can give you a copy. Like it's really not much different for me
yeah.
if you buy a copy or I give you a copy.
Is it
Yeah,
physical or is it just a
it's a
digital?
physical book and digital. I get slightly more on the digital. I think it's like a 25% royalty on the digital copies. But the physical ones, I think, because they deduct like the printing cost and like shipping costs and all. There's a lot of costs that they deduct out of it. And then, at the end of it, my royalties are extremely small on the physical copies. But I mean, it's cool to have the physical copy and stuff. But yeah, if I had like the 360 type of deal, it would be pointless for me to even do the book because I knew that
Yeah,
going in. Other people had told me, you're probably not going to make much money on the actual book. It's not going to be enough to live unless your book is like a bestseller, which is obviously very rare, um, and it's not. So I had kind of been told going in, okay, you're going to make money from these other things, speaking gigs, like all these other types of revenue streams, which the publisher doesn't get a cut of.
yeah, yeah. Do you sell it like through a website as well? Do you get to keep everything on that if you sell through your site?
Yeah, I can sell through my site, but then I have to like pre-purchase a lot of books. So I've done that more for like if there's a group that wants to buy like 100. Like there've been a couple universities which are like, oh, we want to give this to all the students in this class, right? And then I'll do it directly. I'll say, okay, I'll sell it to you for this price, or you can buy it on Amazon, but it's going to cost more if you do that. So then I get to keep more of it because I can buy the books at a like in bulk at a very discounted price. But I haven't done it for like one-off sales because it's not enough volume to be worth kind of the time to like set it up and then go to the post office and mail it and all this stuff. So I just direct people to the Amazon if they're just buying it
And the
individually.
Amazon's like a print to order thing.
I think originally they had done a print batch, but now it might be print to order because it's like 5 years ago the book came out. It's not a
This is
recent. Yeah.
this is like my dilemma with t-shirts. Like, I only to make it cost effective, you've kind of got to get a run of like 100 really.
Yeah.
But actually selling
Yep.
100 t-shirts is kind of like quite hard, and then you end
Yeah.
up just with boxes of t-shirts. So it's
Exactly.
like it's one of those things where it's yeah, you
Yeah.
don't
It's
want
one
to
of those.
pre-order a
Right,
load of
right.
them.
So if you have somebody who wants to buy like a big batch, then it's easy. Then you're just like, okay, yeah, I'll print 100 at once and make it cost effective. But for you to do that on faith and be like, okay, I'm just gonna print 100 and hopefully I sell them, you'll
Yeah.
probably sell them eventually. It's just you'll probably have boxes for a while. So that's why I just
Yeah.
opt. And I live in an apartment, so it's like I don't want to be sitting around with boxes of books around here.
You'll
Um,
be using them as like a table or
exactly.
something. Yeah.
So actually, let's get into value for value. So I know we've alluded to it a few times in this conversation. Some people may be familiar with it because this podcast is supported on Fountain. We do podcasting 2.0. So you've probably heard me talk about this if you listen to the podcast regularly. But value for value is not just for podcasting; it's also for music. And Joe's kind of been a pioneer, I would say, in that area. So Joe, kind of in your own words, how would you describe what value for value is, both in general and also just for you as an artist?
Yeah. Well, the idea is essentially it's kind of, you know, it's trying to disintermediate like these big streaming platforms that are capturing all the value, um, that wants to be sort of sent from the listener to the artist, from the fan to the artist, and it's creating more of like a peer to peer direct relationship between the listener, the fan, and the artist. Um, but it comes with a catch. The catch is you essentially upload your music for free, or start from the premise that okay, I'm going to upload my music to this platform. I use Wavelake. It's like you know it's kind of like the equivalent of Fountain, but for music.
Yeah, and it
And
has a
then you
very
say,
like the user experience is very like almost similar to SoundCloud in a way.
yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
So it's like you upload your music, and the people, if they want to listen, it's currently just a web player. But if you want to listen, you go listen. You can listen for free, and then it's optional whether the person sends you anything if they like the song. So it's kind of like um, Gigi, who like I read his stuff about Vice stuff early on, and it's what inspired me to try this. And in one of his pieces, he writes, it's like the digital equivalent of a sort of street performer, like a busker, where you're in an open space and you're performing, and anyone can stand close by and listen, and then there's no pressure on them to give you anything, and they can carry on walking past. But if they know that if they don't throw something in the hat, or if no one throws anything in the hat, the music's gonna stop. Um, so it's kind of like that sort of, I wouldn't say it's a charitable model, but it's like it's completely voluntary. There's no one locking anyone else in. It's all open. And the thing is, like, the thing about it is, artists have to come to terms with the fact that music is free anyway. If you're putting it on YouTube and Spotify, you're not getting paid for it anyway. It is free, but people don't like that. They don't want to think that their music's free, their art is free,
Yeah.
um, because it takes the artist years of like practicing their craft and honing their craft to come up with this stuff. And not only that, it takes a lot of money invested up front to record it and produce it, and distribute it as well. So, you know, um, people don't like that idea, but
Or it
the
scares them.
internet,
Scares
it
them.
scares them. Yeah, yeah. But the internet is here, and it's a reality, and like we've got to live with it. So we just need to think about a different way of you know of monetizing on like content online. And Gigi put it in a great way. He said, MP3 files, JPEGs, aren't scarce, but the people that create them are. You know, so I
Yep.
think like when people get into this mindset of when more things become value for value and optional, um, nothing's free. Like even we all use like Twitter, maybe you might use Facebook, Instagram for free. Like these things aren't free. Like
Yeah,
someone's
they're not
paying
free.
for them,
Yep.
um,
And
and
you are
people know.
paying for them in one way or the other. Like that the
yeah,
old phrase, like, there's no free lunch. That is so
yeah.
true. I
If
mean,
it's free, you're the product, sort of thing.
yeah, or if something is like abnormally cheap, even like I've done a few episodes recently on the American food system, which is, we can go down that rabbit hole separately. That's probably going to take up too much time. But the thing I've been seeing is like, you can get food really, really inexpensively in the US, but you're paying for that in other ways. Like there's a cost to doing anything. And if something is kind of below market or too cheap, you're paying for it in some way that's not money.
Yeah,
And I think in your analogy here, that's a really good point. Like, yeah, Facebook, you can make an account for free, but you're paying with your attention. You're
yeah,
paying because the advertisers are paying to access your attention, and you are paying with your attention. So it's not free. It's just you're paying for it in a way that's not dollars or pounds, but you're paying for it in another
yeah.
form of currency, essentially.
Yeah, basically. And like attention is a rubbish currency.
Yeah.
It's a rubbish proxy for current for money or currency. Like when if we could just use actual currency, that money that would be better. And that's this whole idea essentially. But like even if if you don't pay for a Spotify subscription, you're getting bombarded with adverts every other song. Same with YouTube. Like now, like you just get more and more adverts on YouTube until it just becomes like unwatchable. And it's like man, if I could just pay like a penny to not have to watch that, or half a penny, and just click a button and it just took the penny, half a penny, you do that, right? So
All day long.
um,
Yep.
yeah, so it's kind of like but it's going to have to be a shift in like the public's perception of this whole way things are, of this whole incentive structure and how the economics of how it works essentially, that it isn't free, you know.
It's
But
also like they've been trained. People have been trained. We all have been trained, I should say, not they. I think we all probably do this. That like music should be inexpensive or free to stream, but then you're willing to do value for value when you go to a show and you buy a T-shirt, right? So it's like it's very
yeah,
interesting that you're like, oh, I'll support the artist in person by going to a show or going to and buying merch or whatever, and people do that quite a bit, even for smaller artists, and then but for streaming music, it's not the norm, I would say, right now at all, to think about how am
yeah,
I paying this artist for their
yeah.
music.
Well, it's just like when someone's getting a physical album in the hand, they can hold it. They physically got it. It's like kind of scarce because I'm only going to make a few of them. So it's like
Right.
they have no problem with handing over £15 for an album, and the same for a T-shirt. But like soon as it's digital and they can just access it whenever,
The-
like it becomes a lot harder trying to convince someone to, even though it's exactly the same thing, it's the same
right.
songs. Like there is no difference. You're getting a nice lyric booklet with the physical album, but it's essentially the same thing, and it cost me the same amount to make it. It doesn't matter if it's digital or not.
Right.
So, but the crazy thing is, like with the value for value, what I found really interesting is, as soon as you ask people, 9 times out of ten they'll give you something back. It might not be a whole lot. It might be 100 sats. It might be like the equivalent of a penny or something. But people like just sending a little something. It makes them feel good. They know they're helping you, and it's like they know they've supported you in some way. And um, for me, it's like I don't mind, send whatever you want, sort of thing. Um, but if people just make like a one-off payment of a few pounds, go listen to my music forever for free because that's how much it would cost for an album, so which you would have then forever because you'd have bought it. So it's one of those things, but it's just like it's just early, so early.
It's just early. And yeah, and Bitcoin, the cool thing about value for value, I guess we should talk about the Bitcoin angle real quick, is that I think Bitcoin kind of makes this possible because you couldn't quite do this with credit cards or
Yeah,
other forms of currency because of the transaction fees and then
yeah,
the way KYC works and all the like nuances of the, let's call it, the fiat banking system. But with Bitcoin, especially I think with like Lightning makes this even more prevalent, and then some of the platforms building on top of Lightning, that you can send small amounts of value, like what you're talking about, 100 Sats, which is what, like a, I don't know the exact. I mean, we can look it up, but 100 Sats is not very much money in fiat terms. But I think it's like very easy on these platforms. Like I send 100 Sats to podcasters all the time, was just like, even if it wasn't like the greatest episode, but I listened to it, or I even listened to it for like 5-10 minutes, I'm like, okay, you did something, you put time into this, here's 100 sats. And people do that on outside the system too. It's, we've like, the cool thing as a podcaster, I think, versus doing something like ads, is you can see, how many people are supporting you, and even if the amounts are not that much, it's like kind of is very encouraging to keep going and keep diving into it, because it's like, I think we've had like 270 individual accounts send us sats, some bigger, some smaller,
That's
but
cool.
that feels really good, that you have 270 people who have found some value at least in what you're doing.
Absolutely, and it sort of brings back some sort of like economic signal back to content again, because it's like it doesn't really have the same effect with streams, like because if you get added to a playlist on Spotify, for instance, like a New Music Friday playlist or whatever it is, you've got people all around the country that might like have just put the music on in the background, or they might have a cafe or an establishment and they plug their phone in and they're playing a playlist, and your song might just make its way into the playlist and get a load of streams. But that doesn't mean that people directly valued that song. You know what I mean? Whereas if someone sends you actual money for that song, you know that they genuinely valued it because there's an economic tie there. There's an economic
Right.
signal. Um, so yeah, I think that's super important as well. Because there's a lot of, well, maybe it's just because I've been brought up on like all the old school music, like uh, you know, really well crafted songs. When I hear some of the stuff nowadays, it's like considered mainstream. I'm like, who's writing this stuff?
Yeah.
like I don't know. It's anyway. But again, maybe that is also a factor of the economic signal being broken away from the music as well. I don't know.
Well, the cool thing too is that, and I just thought of this from what you said, like the value for value part makes it easier to be more of a niche, even, right? Whereas I think the way that the label structure works, you kind of have to be almost all things to all people. Like you need to be you need to have a wide range of fans,
Yeah,
to kind of cover the costs and make everything worth it and make everybody enough money in the whole pie, essentially.
yeah,
Whereas, value for value, I mean, you probably heard that term, 1,000 true fans. I forget who wrote that article, but there was like a article about 1,000 true fans is all any artist, blogger, writer
right. So,
needs to make a living.
so, so
Yeah.
this is the other thing about value for value that I've kind of, was a bit of an epiphany when I first came across it. It was that idea of having a core fan base of say you got it to like 5,000 fans, which is achievable for an independent artist, and they were all on board with value for value, for instance. If they sent you a few pounds a year, like that's really good. Like that's good money,
Yep.
And to them, to send you like 50 pence, like when your song comes out, isn't much, individually, but it builds up quick. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's the thing about bringing that middle ground back for the independent artists. That when this movement gets big enough, and when I don't think it'll just become, you know, it's like a group of people at the moment that are on Bitcoin Twitter and like trying all this cool new tech out, but it will just get plugged into everything. It'll be like seamlessly integrated. Everything will talk lightning. You'll be able to send stuff around dead easy. It's just going to be like sending an email or easier.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's the vision for it. Exactly. And well, with less spam, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah. But, yeah, I guess, so. One question, I guess, that I'm curious about is like, how has this? I mean, I guess, when did you start this experiment with value for value, and then how has it kind of affected your career in a tangible way so far?
So it's funny because like I was listening to Kevin Rook's podcast, and then came across Adam Curry. Started listening to some of his stuff, and was hearing that all the saw Fountain crop up, and um, started looking at that, and I got serious FOMO because I was like, all these podcasters are having all the fun, getting getting sats sent to them, for their content. And I was like, why can't, why isn't any musicians doing this? And I was like, man, I got to get on this because surely loads more people are going to start like flooding in and like thinking this is a good idea. So I went and put a single that I released last October. So what's that, like several months ago? I put it on Fountain as like a podcast episode, basically. And then I went on Stack of News and I was like, hey everyone, like I introduced myself and I said I've just put a song on Fountain because I'm trying to do value for value, but as a musician, like what do we think? And not expecting anything really. And
Yeah.
everyone loved the idea. And I reached out to some great Bitcoiners like Daniel Prince and even Gigi gave it a retweet and stuff like that. I was blown away by the people that were like engaging with it, and I made like £80 or something in the first week, and I was like, that's insane. Like I've only probably made that the whole time, the whole several years I've been on these streaming,
Wow.
Spotify and iTunes and stuff. So I made essentially what had taken me several years in 7 days.
Yep.
So when you
That makes
when you put
sense.
it, yeah, when you put it like that, and this isn't even from my regular fan base of listeners because they're not really. I don't know if they understand the value for value stuff yet. They will one day, but these were just like people on Twitter and stuff, and I was like, it kind of got me like angry, being like, how much value has been siphoned off by like Spotify and iTunes and YouTube and these platforms over all these years. Like how much value? And then like
By a lot.
I was a bit angry about it, and then I was like, well, you know, I guess I shouldn't be angry because this whole tech it didn't exist. Like this whole tech stack to enable this to happen didn't exist. So you know, so at least now it's like I thought, right, okay, new start, fresh start. Okay, we're going value for value from now on. So
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to do. So I released another single off the album earlier this year again, with value for value, and at the same time, Wave Lake was just coming out. So I was talking to Michael and Sam over at Wave Lake and testing some of the stuff with them before they launched that, and giving them feedback and stuff like that. And yeah, and then recently released my album a few days early on Wave
That's
Lake and
awesome.
Fountain as well. And I'll keep doing it. I'll keep putting out everything I release early on these streaming 2.0 value for value platforms because they're putting the artist first. So I'm going to put them first. So that's what I decided. So
Yeah. I mean that makes total sense. I mean, what are I didn't realize Wavelake was that new. I mean, it's super. I
really
mean,
new.
the amount of progress that they've made then in that amount of time is
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah, it's coming along really fast. It's
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah,
Yeah. I wonder, like, as a user, because I was noticing this with Wavelake, because I've been trying it out the last few weeks and stuff. Like, one thing that is a point of friction. I mean, there's obviously, I'm sure they've heard all of this, but just kind of want to bring it up here. Like, one point of friction as a listener on their platform versus something like a Spotify is, in theory, like right now on Wavelake, I have to manually send sats to every artist, right? Or every song that I'm listening to. Whereas, like, for example, on Fountain, I can just set streaming and just stream sats every time I listen to an episode
yeah,
for podcasts. So, I mean, that type of streaming feature for Wavelake would be awesome. And then the other option that could be really cool just as a user is, can I pay a monthly subscription and then it divides my subscription by the artist that I listen to um, directly. So I don't have to think necessarily, and I can send an extra boost, to whoever, but then that way I know I'm at least, contributing for my listening.
yeah,
Almost in the way like a Spotify, like in theory, that's what Spotify does. But then you're right, they siphon off a lot of the value for themselves and then probably like give a sliver broken up by the artist that you listen to. Um,
yeah, yeah,
but I think like you could do this in a value for value way that's actually sustainable for the artist. Like, what if every month I want to like I'm like, all right, I get a lot of value from music. I'm gonna put $20 into this every month, and then Wavelake can take a portion, but the percentage that they would take is, I'm guessing, significantly less than a Spotify, because this is one of the advantages of Bitcoin. I guess we're all building on essentially this like layer that already has gotten, it works incredibly well. um, and we can kind of all build on top of that, whereas Spotify, if you think about it, has to build this whole infrastructure themselves. So that's probably, there's some cost going into that, all the humans that go into building something like that, maintaining something like that, plus there's a profit motive, of course, as a company. So it's a little bit different. It's not there for the
Yeah,
artists, it's there for the company.
yeah, and I don't know I don't know anything about the scaling solutions of like how to host all that music when it gets to a certain size and the costs involved in that. Because I think the way Wavelake are going about it at the moment is they're just taking a split of every boost that is sent. So I think it's something like 95% goes to the artist, 5% goes
Kind
to
of like
Wavelake.
Fountain in some ways. I think Fountain is
Yeah,
similar take from the podcaster.
yeah, exactly. So, but that's all very well and good now that there's like a handful of artists on there and not that much data to contend with.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
if you try to have like, I think Spotify's got something like 20 million songs on there or something.
Oh wow.
So something like that. So when you get to that number and you need server farms and stuff, like I don't know,
Yeah,
but
it's a little
again,
bit different of a
but
problem to deal with. Yep.
it will obviously scale with the amount of users, right? Like the amount of users engaging with the platform. The big question is how, because Spotify and iTunes and YouTube have such dominant network effects, is how to get the listeners hopping over from one platform to another. When they're not going to want to leave Spotify, where all their playlists are, and
Although I'll say Fountain's done a good job. Like, I used to listen
yeah,
to all my
okay,
podcasts on Spotify, and now the thing that's addicted me to Fountain, besides being a podcaster, obviously myself, and seeing how the ecosystem works, is it's kind of like, to network effects was the perfect phrase that you just used, because I feel like on Fountain it works similarly. Like, as you follow more people follow you, your
yeah,
feed gets very interesting. So this actually brings up a question I was going to ask you, because in podcasting, I've noticed the value for value system is very helpful for me to discover new podcasts or discover episodes of podcasts that I should be listening to. In the feed, right? I'll see like, oh, so and so boosted this by 5,000 sats, or so and so sent 50,000 sats to TFTC episode, whatever, and it's really helpful for me to just see what people are boosting, because then if there's an episode that pops up that I've never seen that podcaster before, no idea what that podcast is, but I'm seeing some boosts, I'm like, oh, I should add that to my queue. That's
yeah.
probably
There must
interesting.
be something. There must be something here. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually a great signaling mechanism that people are putting, they're putting their hard-earned money essentially towards certain episodes. And so it gives you this real sense of like, okay, if they're doing that, there must be truly something here. I should listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
Music could, I think, be very similar, because that feature is what is bringing me to Fountain now for all my podcast listening, because it's like, I want to be able to boost podcasts, and I want to be able to see what other people are boosting. So it's the truly network effect that's kind of keeping me there now. um,
Yeah,
I could see the same
and
for
wait,
music. Like, who doesn't like discovering new music,
yeah, and Wavelake do have something similar where they got a top 40 leaderboard
Yes,
of
I've
like the
seen that.
most
Yep.
boosted songs that rise and fall. So that's good for discovering new songs as well. Um, but I guess just back to your point with you saying it was easy enough to move over to Fountain, I think it's less of a thing with podcasting because everything's sort of RSS based.
Yes, it's very true.
So it doesn't really matter what platform, what app you're listening to it with, because you can always find that episode in another app very
Exactly.
easily.
Yeah.
So with Spotify,
And
obviously it's
Spotify
different.
hasn't been doing it for that long. Spotify, if you think about it, only recently got into podcasts, like last few years. It wasn't something they were doing, from the beginning. Whereas music, people might have had playlists from 10 years ago on Spotify that they don't want to lose.
Yeah, exactly. But so say like my favorite artist on Spotify, if they upload, it's not like it's an interoperable thing where if they upload it to Spotify, it will be on every other thing that does music. It might just be on Spotify, for
Yep.
instance.
It's
Like,
not a open ecosystem.
yeah, so until this is the thing, like to try and get the listeners across to a different platform like Wavelake, I think it's going to take a concerted effort from the artist as well to be quite vocal to say, you know, I'm going to release all my music early on Wavelake, and then it's going to go on Spotify a week later. So if people want to hear the new album from their favorite artist, they've got to go to Wavelake to listen to it first, and then that will hopefully bring more and more people in. Um, but again, it's tough. It's tough. It's like network effects are sticky on it. It's kind of
Of course, yeah.
it's one of those where and for me as well, it's like I don't know whether I'd just say listen to it on whatever you want. Just pay me a one-off. Just send me a one-off boost on whatever, and then just go and listen where all your music is. I don't know, but we're figuring it out as we go, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and I think just like anything, there's like early adopters, people who are gonna do this first, people who will do this later. Like, I've been harassing my friends now about getting on Fountain, and probably will do the same for value music as well.
Yeah,
But I think it's like the music part. I'm actually very encouraged by because there is an offline equivalent, right? Like I do truly like I have a friend who's in the music merch business, and I mean, he always tells me how many people buy merch at shows, which you've seen as well. People buy merch at shows, and it's part of it is you want to signal to others that, okay, look, Liz, I'm listening to this artist, or I know about this cool new artist. That's part of wearing a shirt from an artist. The other part is supporting that artist. And I actually think value for value hits both of those, right? If you have the network effect or social kind of way of showing, oh, I like when you boost a podcast on Fountain, it shows up in people's feeds, right? So again, it's signaling like, look, I'm supporting this artist. And sometimes the comments can be really funny that people make on Fountain. I could see similar types of things happening on music as well. But then the
yeah,
idea
and
of supporting an artist makes total sense. I think like most people understand the concept, but I don't think most people understand how the business model works today and how hard it is for an artist to actually make money.
yeah,
So they don't think about this from a streaming perspective, right?
yeah, for sure. And like people do want to be seen to be like the super fans as well of an artist.
Yes.
And you could
Yes.
even do something like you could even say, my top 10 or my top five most boosted people can get a free gig ticket or something. Like you could always like do something like that to
Oh yeah, like
encourage people.
promotions or yep.
Yeah, yeah. There's loads of things you could do.
Yeah, like I've
Um,
been doing something for the podcast even. You can clip podcasts on Fountain. People can make clips. So I post on Twitter periodically to remind people, but it's like, I mean, if anybody makes a clip, I will send you at least 100 sats. So it's just,
that's
I
cool.
mean, because it's like they're doing work to help the podcast ultimately. Like it's a clip that I didn't have to go make myself.
Yeah,
But people like it's cool that you can run those kind of like contests and stuff in the value for
yeah.
value world.
And
Yeah.
and I think I heard the Wavelake guys talking about if someone shares your song, and then that song gets boosted, the person that shared it can have a sliver as well.
That's
Because
cool. Like
you
they're like influencer.
what yeah, but just
Yeah,
like because you wouldn't have got that boost maybe if they hadn't shared it, so they should get a little tiny cut as well, which I think is a good idea. Yeah,
I like that a
so
lot.
many
Yeah.
so many things you can do. So we're just scratching the surface, I think.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, I have a last couple questions. So one, if someone's listening to this and let's say they're an artist and they're like, okay, I want to learn more about this. I want to get involved. Like, what is the best place to start? Because I could tell them for podcasting, I could tell you where to start. But for an artist who's like, okay, I want to try out value for value, what's the best next steps for them to do, or what should they be reading, or what should they be doing?
Yeah, I'd say the best place to go is Wavelake at the moment for sure. It's super easy. You just sign up. You just make an account with an email and password, and you're ready to go. You don't even have to worry about the Lightning stuff. They have like a Lightning wallet built into your account, which you can just withdraw from any time you're ready to do that. And then it's just dead easy uploading, your MP3 file and artwork. to get up on the site. Um, that said, um, I don't know because I uploaded to Fountain first because there was nothing else at the time. So I don't know whether if I was starting again now, whether I'd do that because it is a podcasting app. Although I think they are looking to expand into music stuff as well. But I still get a lot of boosts and stuff from Fountain, so it's kind of like I don't want to, I don't want to take my stuff off there. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of I made an account with RSS.com to have an RSS feed, which I'm paying a monthly subscription for at the moment, which isn't ideal because I'm not making. Because the thing is different with podcasting and music, because like podcasters are quite prolific. They'll make an episode every week or every other day, and
Right. It's not music. Yep.
the
Music
podcast,
takes a lot longer.
yeah, exactly. So the podcast can last anywhere between like an hour or even 2 hours or whatever. And through that hour or 2 hours, people, if they're doing a streaming thing constantly, they're constantly streaming stats and boosting throughout that time. Whereas a song is like 3 minutes long.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot of money if you go to a studio and you get it produced properly. You got musicians to pay, you got your mixing and mastering, you got your studio time, you got your artwork, and it gets really expensive. Just for even one song is it can cost like
There's a
1,000.
lot.
It can cost like $1,000 to make like one song to do it well.
Wow.
It costs a lot. So yeah, I mean, so there's that to take into consideration as well. So I don't know, but I think you can. I don't know. Don't quote me on this, but you might be able to host an RSS feed from Wavelake and have that propagate to like apps like Fountain and all the other RSS compatible apps. Whereas there's no host. I don't know if there's a hosting fee with Wavelake at the moment because they're doing it on a percentage thing when they get streams. I don't really know too much about that yet, but yeah, I'd just say start with Wavelake and then go from there.
Yeah.
Resources, I'm not too sure. Maybe um, Kevin Rook's podcast is a good place to start. That's where I learned a lot of stuff. Adam Curry is always pushing the boundaries.
Oh yeah.
He gave me a spin on his show, Podcasting 2.0 podcast the other day, and it was the first. Apparently, it was the first ever streaming split where during the episode the value block changed to my Lightning address, and within that 3 minutes, anyone that boosted it would go to me, which is really cool.
Wow. That's awesome. We'll
Yeah,
definitely link to that.
that was really cool. So that's a big honor that from the Podfather himself to have done that with high gravity. But I've got a blog on my website. It's pretty simple, but it's got some links to some other articles that people can read, like Gigi's articles and to little snippets from other podcasts. And that's just at my website, joemartinmusic.com/value for value. And I'm going to be keeping that up there for the foreseeable. So if people want to find out a bit more, they can head there, and that's got some more resources.
Awesome. Yeah. And then I guess last but not least, where can people support you or learn more about your music, listen to your music? What's the best place to send them? Or best places, I should say.
If they want to experience the Wavelake experience, they can go there and just find me on Wavelake, Joe Martin Music. Again, on Fountain, I've got like a podcast show, and each song is an episode there. If they search Joe Martin Music on Fountain, they can find me. And then they can, if they go to joemartinmusic.com/value for value, they can also send through my OpenNode instance there if they want to send any on-chain or Lightning or anything like that. But yeah, just check out the new album, which has just come out, and see what you think. If you like it, give it a boost. It might not be your jam, but that's cool. And then if there's anyone listening in the UK, I'm gigging quite a bit up and down the country. So you can find that on my website as well. I've just landed some dates in Germany later on this year.
Oh wow!
I've not. Thank you. Yeah, I've not fully announced that yet, but that'll be on my website as well pretty soon. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I will say from my part, like I was listening to the album while driving. I think it's good. It's good driving music. I still need to boost you. I'll do that right now as soon as we're off the air here. But it was good. It was like really nice driving music. I'll say like nice sunny day, like open road kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if you get that often, but that's the sort of vibe that I got when I was listening to it. And then I was like, all right, I have a long drive like in 2 days. I'm gonna put this on as part of what I listen to.
There you go. It's the empty passenger seat and that whole Capri tying into it all,
Yep.
giving it those vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I liked it. I liked it. Yeah. So I'll link to all this stuff in the show notes as usual for anyone listening. I'll link to Joe's Twitter, his website, the album, and his other profiles elsewhere. And then other things we talked about in this episode. There'll be links and resources in the show notes. So make sure you check that out. Joe, thanks so much for coming on. This is awesome.
Thanks for
I'm
having me,
excited.
Neil.
Maybe we'll get you on for the next album. I know it's it's probably not coming out anytime soon, but
I
uh,
need to write it yet.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But yeah, maybe we'll get you on and see how everything's going on the value for value. Hopefully the ecosystem has grown a bit, before the next album comes out. But yeah, you're doing great work, man. Keep it up, and thanks for supporting the ecosystem.
Thanks for having me on, Neil. Appreciate it.